program you're with, and one or two things you hope to get from today's session, just so I have a sense of what your main interests are. It's always hard to know how to go around the circle. So I'm just going to go to the person to my left, which is Zakima. Maybe I'm saying your name wrong. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Zakima. My nickname is Ziki. Everyone calls me Ziki. I'm the director of mathematics at Grace Outreach. And I'm happy to be here. I'm hoping to learn a little bit about something that I could use in the classroom that might be free.
Yes.
I've done a couple of workshops similarly, and all of the ones presented are kind of expensive.
Yes. Excellent. And you said math is the area that you are particularly working in. Okay,
yeah,
fantastic.
I teach just math.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Zakima. Mildred, how about you?
Good morning. My name is Mildred. I am the case manager at Union Settlement Association, and I'm hoping to learn something new.
Sick. I hope there's something new. You'll probably teach me something today. We'll see. Thank you, Lindsay.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I thought you said Lindsay. I heard Lindsay.
I actually said Lindsay, but that's fine. We can start with Lindsay Wolf. I should say the full name. That'll help.
Hi, Lindsay Wolf. I am occupational skills instructor at Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow. And yeah, I'd just like to maybe incorporate more digital literacy into my lessons. So that's why I'm here.
Excellent. And are you teaching a specific area or?
I actually teach a few topics. I teach customer service, I teach Microsoft Office, and financial literacy actually as well.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, again, so anybody here, if there's a resource that you can think of while we're talking, put it in the chat. This is a lot about gathering resources, and I'll definitely be giving you access to several places to find tools when you need them. But you guys are out there trying this stuff, so it's really helpful to get your suggestions. And you might think everyone knows, but we don't all know. Fantastic. Thank you, Lindsay. Was that Wendy that came on earlier? Wendy? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So good morning, everybody. My name is Wendy Liao, and I work for Sunnyside Community Services and Chinatown Manpower Project, and I'm an ESOL instructor. Nice to meet you all.
And Wendy, is there anything specific that you were looking for today, or?
Not really, just anything that I could use in my future classes. That would be great.
All right, excellent. Okay, how about Jamie Cobbs?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jamie Cobbs. I work for Wisconsin Literacy, so I'm actually based in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm a tutor training and digital literacy project manager. And I'm here today because I've been training our tutors in our literacy agencies on how to integrate digital literacy. And I'm hoping to hear that I'm on the right track and maybe get some new ideas. Thank you.
And thank you, Jamie. Beatrice Calixto?
Yes, it's the first time anyone says my last name correctly, so I really appreciate that because it's always Calypso, and I'm like, okay.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Beatrice. Everyone calls me B. I'm an ESL instructor at Resettlement, and like the first participant, Zakima, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I also want to integrate more digital, or continue to incorporate, but which is free to my students, because I don't want to put any kind of like financial burden on them.
Excellent. That's very helpful. And a really good point, and something for us to all be aware of. Thank you. Arlette Hamilton.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Arlette Hamilton, and I'm the writing instructor. I'm actually Ziki's co-worker. I'm the writing instructor at Grace Outreach here in Bronx, New York. And I'm looking forward to today's workshop. This is actually my very first workshop, believe it or not. I've been teaching for over 7 years now. And I'm looking forward to actually learning something that I can incorporate in my classroom, like Ziki expressed, that would be free for our students. So I'm very excited about today's workshop.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Excellent. All right. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I did put the link to our slides in the chat. but I will also be showing them to you. Oh. All right. So again, integrating digital literacy skills and resilience in your content instruction. I have been working, so I'll introduce myself. So I'm Nell Eckersley and I work at the Literacy Assistance Center. And I was an ESL teacher, I was a program manager, and when I first started at the Literacy Assistance Center, I worked in the data area, ASSIST, and I was training people on using that system. And I wasn't born techie. If people think of the word techie, that was not my t-shirt that I was wearing. But I do enjoy it. And I feel like I particularly enjoy helping folks or working with folks who are really struggling or really nervous about it, because I think that's where we come from. And there's this idea that some people are just naturally techie, and I don't think that's true. Some people definitely have more facility and more experience, but I think we can all get there. So that's kind of my underpinning. And then I really, it's always struck me that the things that we did in class kind of got stuck in class. Like we had a lab when I was teaching and we would work on things in the lab, but we didn't really help our students consider how they could take whatever they did with us out in the world. Cell phones or smartphones were not as ubiquitous as they are today, but I don't think people are thinking about. So very much what we're going to talk about today are skills and tools that can be used both while the student is with you in whatever facility you have access to, as well as out in their own lives. And we're going to be kind of using that in the back of our minds when we think of lessons that we want to be teaching skills that students can really use in their regular lives, whether it's just everyday life productivity, it's for employment, it's for future education. So we're going to keep that in our minds a little bit as we go through this. So in our slides, you'll see on the second slide that we have our agenda. What do you think, why are there some things here that are in teal and underlined? What does that make you think?
They're hyperlinks.
Yes, the hyperlinks. So what do you think happens if you click on the word definitions? What will happen then, do you think?
Maybe link to a website that gives you definitions.
Right, exactly. So it's a link out to some other information, but here's the trick that I learned. You can actually link inside your slides. So actually this acts like I'm going to actually put it in a slideshow mode just to show you. It's a little bit more obvious this way. So if I'm here and I want to get to the lesson ideas in this slide presentation, I can actually just go click and it will take me to the lesson ideas. And if I go back to agenda, I get back here. So again, for today, it's not so useful, but in the future, if you come back to the slideshow and you're like, I don't need to go through all this stuff, I just want to get to the finding digital tools piece, you can go here and click on this. But this ability to create hyperlinks, I think, is one of the skills that is people don't know that they can do it, and when you can do it, it feels very magical. And really one of my kind of misunderstandings when I first heard of the World Wide Web when I was in college was that every word on the internet was going to be a hyperlink. And I was like, what? That's crazy. It's like, actually, no, that's not true. But I can make any word I want into a hyperlink. So imagine a student working on a project and there's vocabulary or a solution to a math problem or something like that they want to share. They could actually put a hyperlink in their document that takes you out to an explanation, to a website, to a video, to a definition. That's great practicing of skills. So to make a hyperlink, I'm going to go ahead and remove this one just so you can see it. Let me escape first of all. So to make a hyperlink inside slides, and this is actually same in as far as I know across the computer spectrum. So if you're in Microsoft Word or if you're in Google Doc, whatever, you can do the same thing. So you're going to highlight the word that's going to be what people see. And then you're going to create a link. So you're going to go up to the ribbon, to that little link symbol, or if you right click on it, you usually get an option for making a link as well. And again, there's even a keystroke, Control K, which I always forget. So I'm going to click on link. If you're in Google Slides, the thing I was just doing now where I connected to a slide in the presentation, that option is at the bottom of this pop-up list. So I'm going to click on that. And it will show me the titles of the slides. So this is particularly useful if you've gone ahead and used the title on your slide. It will actually be able to find that, and it'll stay connected even if you change the order of your slides. So I'm going to go scoot down until I find my resources section. There it is. So it's going to be the first slide in the resource section. And now that is a hyperlink to that. And when I'm not in presenter mode, I can still get there. As I click on this, I get this little pop-up box, I guess you could call it, down the bottom here. And if I click on that, it would actually take me to that section as well. So you don't have to be in presentation mode, but when you're in presentation mode, it's the most smooth. Similarly for you, if you're a teacher and you want to make an ebook using Google Slides, this would be a way to have an agenda. You could even have it as your calendar for your class, a syllabus for your class. And so you could have that agenda be a list of dates. And as you click on the date, you get to that slide. So there are a lot of different ways this can be useful. And hyperlinks in general are such a joy. Hyperlinks. All right.
Sorry,
Yes.
Mel. Can you,
Yeah.
after you highlighted it, can you show us which icon it was you went to at the top? I missed that.
Sure. No, absolutely. So, and this is something to know about Google Slides. Whenever you're in a Google slide, depending on, so you see how there's a blue line around things, that's what's active. And whatever is active, you'll see, we call this a ribbon at the top here. The ribbon changes depending on what you are working on. So this is an image. If I click on it, you see that the ribbon changed. So in order to find the icon I used before, I do need to be on a Word. And once I'm inside editing the text, I see it up here. It's this tiny little, it's a link. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Yeah, there it is. Can you see it there, Sakima? It's this one right here. I can also add a little screenshot of that later on. If you don't see it, sometimes it gets hidden under these 3 dots. So now that I've enlarged my screen or enlarged the space, you'll see that as I make it smaller, I sometimes lose some of the items in the ribbon, and they'll all be hidden under those 3 dots. So you have 3 options. You have the little icon up here, you have the Control K, and you also, once you highlight the word, you should be able to right click on it, and it will also show up there as an option to create your link. And when I first did this, I was always linking out, just like Lindsay said, I was linking out to something somewhere else. So for example, this link is going to our slides. So this is a link that's going out into the world. You'll see there's a lot of links like that here, right? So this link, similarly, this is, oh, and here's something else. Not just words can be hyperlinks. So let me show you. If I wanted to, I could highlight, I'm going to grab this link. So it's a hyperlink in the sense that it goes out, but it's not the fun hyperlink where it's kind of hidden. I can make an image into a hyperlink as well. So this is an image. If I click on that, so it's highlighted, and again, right click on it, I should have the option. That's not going to make it easy. Okay, so I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to go back up to my ribbon, click on that link, and I'm going to paste my link in there and apply it. So now it's not obvious, but this is now also a link to the same website. So in slides, you can both make images and words into links out to the world or internal to the slides. So I've given you the Google Slides. I'm going to, part of what I'm doing today is I'm being very explicit in how I think about what technology I'm using in my workshops, which is one reason I'm taking the time out to tell you all of this stuff right now, because I think as you begin to, or continue to, or go deeper in your integration of technology into your teaching, part of it is to develop what we call routines. And we're going to talk about routines later on in more depth, but it's the idea that there are kind of basic habits or techniques that we have for teaching different kinds of content or assessing content, whatever, the different parts of your teaching practice. And with bringing technology in, part of it is that technology should often help so there's a couple of reasons we bring technology into our instruction. Part of it is for digital skills for our students. So deciding what skills we really want our students to leave our class with is part of what we're going to talk about today. But part of it is that it actually facilitates instruction, and we want to make it meaningful, right? We're not just practicing moving our hands around with a little thing in our hand. We're actually practicing moving an object on the screen and knowing that if we right click or left click, it does something because we need it to, not just because you can. So teaching digital skills in application is really important, and the application should kind of make sense and be useful. One of my struggles a little bit is that I think back to my junior high learning Spanish, right? So I studied Spanish all the way to college, and I remember very well that in junior high and high school, we learned a lot of vocabulary around the classroom, which I think made sense in that, yes, we're going to be asked, can we erase the board, was a sentence that we probably learned. And I understand why that was done, but it was so not useful ever any other time in my life. Very rarely am I ever going to say, can I erase the board, or please erase the board. So it would have been more useful if that work had been done around something that I was actually going to use in the real world. We, working in adult ed, kind of have the luxury of having students who are going to take exactly what they do with us and take it into the real world. Yes, there's academic language, they're learning things maybe to take the high school equivalency, that's more academic, but pretty much everything we do, these students are going to turn around and do it in their lives, just like we as adults turn around and use technology in our lives. So that's kind of, again, these are sort of all things to have in the back of your head. So, yes, we're going to talk about definitions today, just a few definitions, just so you have them. And again, not to remember them necessarily, but you'll have this document, you can come back to them, but we're definitely going to define what digital skills are, digital literacy skills are. We're going to talk a little bit about some ways to think through what digital literacy skills that you really want to teach. So you're going to make those your priority, and then we kind of scaffold the lessons around those. We're going to look at some places where you can find the tools and lesson ideas when you're ready for them. And for yourself too, right? One of the things with digital literacy for most of us is that we're all learning all the time too. So students and teachers in this case are all students. And then we have a couple of not lesson ideas for us to talk through, like how would we do this after we've gone through all these other things. So, and at the end, you will be able to define what digital literacy skills are, identify digital literacy skills that you want to integrate into your lessons, and then locate tools to support the lessons that you want to develop. This workshop is funded by the Department of Youth and Community Development, and Liz Elena, who runs this project, has created a great resource for you all on this Weebly down here, and I know she'll even add, I think these slides and things will end up there, but it's a great resource for you to come back to. All right, so definitions. So I'm not really going to go deeply into digital. So right now, there's a lot of talk, maybe you're hearing it. There's a lot of funding coming out of the federal government around digital equity. There's the pandemic really shone a spotlight on a problem that has long existed where, maybe you've heard the phrase digital divide. There's a digital divide, but it's not just in access to hardware and internet, it's actually access to skills. And we are the skills piece of that. So digital equity is the condition where we have equality for everyone and with their access and how they can participate with digital tools. We have digital inclusion, which are the activities, and this is where the funding, I think, is going to come. It's broken into these 5 buckets. Sometimes you'll see it broken into 3 buckets, but basically it's access to broadband, robust broadband, access to devices, and then digital skills. So when the funding comes out, adult ed is very well situated to do the digital literacy training. Some programs I know are also doing, supporting folks getting broadband and also they're able to give out devices. That's fantastic. But we specifically are kind of built to be doing the digital literacy training. So you might see that this becomes something that's a if you can develop a curriculum or you develop lessons around this, that is something that later on actually could help you get funded to do more of that work. They've added technical support because that is one of the issues. You know, you get your laptop, but then it breaks. How do you get help, or how do you learn how to make it do the thing you want it to do? And then using applications well, and finding applications that are actually useful to you. The request today, for example, that we find ones that are free. We definitely will be, I think everything we're going to talk about today is free, and that is something for us to really consider, and also how much data the lesson might require students to use and so forth. So definitely thinking about all those things. But the really important one for us today is digital literacy skills. And I'm using the definition that WIOA, Workforce Investment Opportunities Act, uses, and they took it from the libraries, I think it's the United States Central Library Organization. I'm not remembering their name. And this is their definition. It's a very broad definition, but it is a nice, it gives us a lot of leeway, and it helps us understand what we're looking for, right? So we're looking for an opportunity to practice the skills, to use technology to find, evaluate, organize, create, and communicate information. And this is so important that we're really talking about information. And if you think about, and some of you are maybe old enough to remember or have experienced in your life a time before you really had email, and there's a very funny cartoon somewhere where, like, you know, we can't wait to get an email, and then now we can't wait to get a letter because letters are so much more scarce and emails come in all the time. So learning how to interact with information in these ways, and to think about it in a way where we're not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but we're actually doing it to solve a problem. The link there will take you out to the WIOA kind of brief on digital literacy skills. So this is kind of what we're using today. It's very broad. A couple of other definitions here. So let's see. Digital resilience is also a new term, or actually it's an older term that has a new meaning. So if you look up digital resilience, sometimes you'll find it's used for organizations and their infrastructure around their digital footprint, or safety for their servers and things like that. Backup, right? If you lose lose electricity, can you access your server, whatever. We're using it to talk about what it takes for us to be willing and able to roll with the punches. So I don't know if you've had the experience where, you know, there's a tool online that you've used a lot and you're very familiar with it and you feel very comfortable, and then you come back one day and it's changed, right? Or I know I went to my bank website and the login used to be in the upper right corner and suddenly it's on the left. Or my projector doesn't work the day I think I'm going to use it in class. How do we overcome those obstacles? So it's a variety of pieces, right? It's, as they say here, it's problem solving, upskilling, navigating transformations, and there's an emotional component to this. And I've seen it with a lot of folks who are nervous around technology, and they tend to fall back on taking lots of notes, and they feel very nervous, and they're convinced the thing will break. They're convinced they'll never find it again. They're working on slides maybe, and they move something off the screen and they get very, they don't have a lot. It's very hard to re-center themselves and feel able. And I have this about sewing machines. So I understand this feeling of like, well, it worked this time, but it might not work next time. Where with a computer, I'm pretty much like, yeah, that's stupid that it's not working today, but I'm going to make it work. I'm going to turn it off, turn it back on again. Like, I have some techniques. I'm going to Google, I'm going to find a YouTube video. But if you don't practice that and you don't believe that that will work, you are probably going to like not look at the computer and stay away from it. And I've definitely had students who they had computers at home, and often it was women who were telling me this, but it could be anybody in the family, but it was often women, and their husbands would be using the computer and their children would be using the computer, and the women were just like, I don't even know why I would use a computer. And we got them email addresses, and it was I mean, they cried because they could now communicate with their family at home, back in their home countries and things like that. So developing that is a huge piece of what we're doing. So when we are teaching using technology, it's really great to talk people through the problems you might have. Like if you are the teacher and the projector isn't working, you know, notice for yourself how flustered you might feel, like figure out how you can help yourself calm down, talk to the students about what you're doing, how you're troubleshooting, maybe they have some suggestions, really making this an open experience so that they know that it's not easy for anyone, right? This is hard for everybody, but we overcome it because the rewards are great enough. So digital resilience is kind of a new byword. There's this project called Digital Resilience in the American Workforce that is available on Links. If you're familiar with Links, is a federally funded professional development for adult education. It's definitely worth checking out. I've been working on a project they're doing where we're going to have online modules where you can learn actually very much what I'm talking about today. I worked on a module that's about doing exactly this. How do you do this? There's a lot of resources coming out, partially because of all the funding and all the interest right now in this area, and recognizing that this has been something that's been neglected for so long. So DRAW is definitely something there've been a couple of great, they did a landscape scan, so they have some great information from that, but they are still developing more resources. So there's more to come. It's just very, very new, actually. And then we have routines, as I mentioned earlier. So we're using routines today with the idea that you probably have some routines. When I was teaching, you know, if I was going to do a reading with students, I gave them a piece of paper, or they had a book and they did their reading, and then they wrote a reflection, or I put them in pairs and they talked to somebody, their partner, about the book for the reading. That was my routine. They kind of knew it was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen. I might have 2 or 3. But we want to now, that's a great way to bring in technology, because those are often easy ways to practice a skill over and over again. And students kind of get used to that, and it actually helps the learning process. Okay, so deciding what digital skills to teach. So right now, when you are teaching, how do you decide, or how are you told what you're going to teach in a semester? How does that happen? Feel free to unmute. So I know several people were teaching math. What's your curriculum? How did you decide what your curriculum was? Zukima.
I kind of decide based on the concepts that I think permeate the entire test, because
excellent.
We have a certain number of weeks with our students. So I try not to focus on the teeny, what I call not a make or break concept, you know,
Gotcha.
like subtracting fractions. Like it's not something that permeates the entire exam. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, because we have the more important concepts, inverse operations property, that you run over
need to know back
a million times when you're solving a problem on the GED. So I
excellent.
just on, you know, what I think the major concepts are. It took a long time to just finalize what I really thought. And then of course the test changed and now it's back to the GED. So I'm sort of revamping, but you know, yeah.
But so that's, so basically you have, we know there's a goal that your students have, which is to get their high school equivalency diploma, and to do that, they need to pass a GED. And so you're looking at the GED for kind of the outline of what people will need. And then now you're kind of backwards planning from there. And that's how you come up with your content. And that's helpful, right? When we have an assessment, I mean, teaching to the test, whatever, but we know kind of the skills, it sort of creates a clear path of skills that we want to get our students to practice and deepen. What about, I know we had some ESL teachers. How do you decide what's included in your classes? Yeah, Beatrice. Yeah.
We, at the beginning of every cycle, we're, given the task of having that cycle curriculum. And it's usually the same thing. It's about city, looking for a job, I'm looking for resources. But what I do follow the guideline somewhat, but I decide what I'm going to teach either the day after or the week after based on their needs. They might have more questions about a certain topic where I just don't want to skip to the next topic without them fully understanding, different parts of what I'm teaching. So I kind of let them guide me, like I use them as a guide for me to kind of
Fantastic.
figure everything out.
Right, and that's a very important part. I don't know if you're familiar with the term andragogy, which is the difference between andragogy and pedagogy, but really with that idea that adult students do come with very clear sense of what they
Absolutely.
want to learn
Yes.
and turning around the next day and using it. And I think even with Ziki's example, again, the goal there is they want to get their high school equivalency diploma. This is their goal, this is why they're in our class. And in your ESL class is the same way. We want to use the same kind of ideas when we're thinking about integrating the technology pieces. So sometimes we are, as instructors, it's not that we know best, but we have a bigger picture, and we're going to maybe push our students into places that they aren't comfortable or wouldn't necessarily say, I really want to know how to do this. An example is I've heard a lot of teachers told me that their students don't really care about email. They don't see a purpose to it. It's not part of their everyday life. And I know I just gave you the example of my experience with people being very happy about getting email, but they didn't want it at first and they didn't do it on their own. And they were much happier texting or using WhatsApp. And those are great tools. So let's start there. Let's start with the texting and with WhatsApp. How do you text in a very fluent way? Say you're an ESL teacher. Again, I've worked with some people who their texting was very, it wasn't very fluent. So the phrases they were using in English were kind of not what I expected to read in a text, and it made the communication a little bit choppy. And if they just had a few phrases, and especially this was a person who was doing some work for me, and she would sort of text me and say, hey lady, I'm feeling delicate today. And I understood what it meant, and I was fine with me. Felt bad for her for feeling delicate. But if that had been written in a different way, it would have had a professional relationship piece to it that would have, I think, benefited her, especially with other people who perhaps don't want to be thoughtful or understand. So practicing on very specific phrases that are useful and working on texting and whether using text or WhatsApp or other tools like that can be really great. But it's, to me, the thin end of the wedge, as I call it. So once we get folks interested in that and we work on that, then maybe we can start to talk about why email can be important or should be important. And the reason email is important is that in a lot of formal situations, it is email that is going to be used, or an email address is what's required when you buy things online, when you want to track things online. Often your email address is going to be used. And if it's a Gmail address, now you have access to all of the Google stuff. And that's also beneficial. You never have to use it again, but we're going to use it a lot in our class perhaps, right? So moving along, we might not jump right straight into email, but we might start off with how do we communicate? When do we use email versus a letter versus a text versus a video chat, right? When are these, and even making that decision is a digital skill, right? So we talked earlier about the definition where this is how do we make the decision about which way of communicating or which type of information are we going to use? So those are great ways to kind of think about this. So exactly what you've said as far as let's reflect back what students are interested in, but sometimes we also have to kind of think about how that then leads us to the piece that we want to get to because we think it's going to be important. Did anybody else want to share how they figure out their curriculum or their syllabus, their learning plan for the semester? Do any of you, so I think Beatrice, you mentioned that there were some required things. I remember when I was teaching, students had to do a resume and and those things went into a file. And so when the funder came, they could come and see those. So sometimes we have those elements, right, that we're required to do. And then I know I also use the textbook, right? So I didn't necessarily go page 1, page 2, page 3, but I had a book that students were able to have for free, and I wanted to utilize that book. So I did use that, but I tried to plug it in an order that fit my sense of what was happening. And we also talked about something called a scope and sequence, right? So that when you you might be introducing, and again, because I come from ESL, I'm going to probably use those terms, but maybe I'm introducing the past tense in week 1, and then by week 5, we're not introducing it anymore, right? Now we're practicing it and we move forward into something else, or yeah, anyway, so that's another way to think about it, right? That we're going to scaffold the skill by what we call scope and sequence. What's the scope of what we're teaching, and what's the sequence of how we're going to teach it, and over what period of time. Okay, so all of that is true for digital skills. I think the tricky part is that, do we even know what digital skills are? Is there a giant list somewhere, and can I just check off the boxes? And how do I know what my students already know? We don't have an assessment. Your students are not put in your class based on their technology level, right? They're put in, maybe they're put in your class by having taken the TABE or the Best Plus test, and kind of sort of being in the same level that way. So we are gonna, again, as a sort of thought to have in the back of the head, we want to think about what's going to be useful for our students going forward. We talked about resilience. This is a list of skills that the World Economic Forum thinks are important. They're not all digital, but they are broader perhaps than the explicit how to use email, right? They are technology use, monitoring and control, technology design and programming. They talk about resilience here, reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. And if you look at the college and career readiness standards, technology is not a separate piece, but can be embedded in many of those places. So while these are explicitly about technology, reasoning and problem solving around technology is huge, right? We often see that, like, well, we've worked with 3 different tools today. This is the assignment. Which tool do you think would be the best one for that? That's an amazing question. And people might have different answers, and there might not be a right answer. But if there's an explanation and a thought process about why you chose that tool over this tool. STEM you might have heard of, right? So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And sometimes it's called STEAM. You have art in there as well. And really, more than the discrete skills in each of those different areas, it's the way of thinking about problems, right? So you identify a problem. In all of those areas, that's the beginning of your process. You identify the problem, and then you go through a process of trying different solutions. And you have some level of knowledge, so you're going to apply that, but it may not work. So then you have to come up with another solution or try a different. And so, as a scientist, you would do many different studies. You might make a model. In math, you have some of your know exactly the different kinds of equations and things that you might have to use, but you have to come up with that, right? Like that's where story problems come from, that you have your story. What math would you use to come up with the answer to that question? So in this, we want to look at it that way too, that with technology, when they put technology into STEM and STEAM, it's usually around actually programming, I think. But I actually think this way of being in the world is true our whole lives, that we don't notice, but we need to develop and practice this system of noticing what the problem is and coming up with 1 or 2 different solutions and having ways to figure out which one might be better before we even try them, maybe. And then when we try them, how do we know when we've resolved our problem? So all of that thinking, we can embed that in everything. So anyway, so you have these top 15 skills. We're not going to really talk about that too much. It's kind of just to show you that we're doing things that the world needs. What we're going to use today is something called the POST method. And POST was created actually for companies to develop their own social media plans, but we're going to use it around technology and instruction. And what I like about the POST method is the kind of order of thinking. We start with the people. And you already said that when you described how you develop your curriculums, right? That you are thinking about your students and what they came to you for. So it's the people first, and the people include you. Then we have objectives. So what are you trying to get done? What is the thing students should learn? What should they be able to do after they leave your class? strategies, which I think we could kind of equate with routines, right? What are your ways of teaching those things? And then the technology. And technology, often in these situations, when you're talking about integrating the technology, not the digital literacy skills, but the technology, is to think of it as a something that will enhance the instruction, that will solve a problem that you might have, where you're like, oh, I like this lesson, but I can't quite, there's something missing. What is missing? And maybe there's a technology tool that can help with that. So people, first thing, assessment. How do you know what skills your students have and don't have? That's a little tricky, right? They're not, as I said, they're not placed in your classes based on their technology levels, and technology levels are all over the place. So there is the North Star digital skill assessment, which is free. And it's a very gentle, you can actually do it, they've made it so it's phone, something you can do on your phone now, mobile friendly. And I believe there's also a Spanish version. And it takes you through your skills. And at the end, you get a report that tells you what your strengths are and where you could do with practice. And then it actually even has some curriculum on its website to help you get the skills that you need to practice. Your organization can become a North Star digital, so it's free, as I said, but if your organization wants to become a partner of North Star, and I think it's $500, but then you can do the assessment and actually get the back end data. So you could do a pre and post assessment. I know several of the library systems have done that, so you could even have your students maybe go through those systems. But again, the free version's there, and it's good for you to take it, because not only is it an assessment to let you know what you don't know, but it actually teaches you some stuff, and it gives you some vocabularies. One of the things when we think about a very basic digital skill is vocabulary. When I want to tell someone where I put a file, or I want to describe, as I was saying in the slides, right, that this is called the ribbon. I don't know that everyone knows that term is what that is. It's important to be able to use that term because of location, right? If I want to tell you, well, I looked in the ribbon and the link icon was not there. That would be a very useful way to describe the problem with precise language. So we want to make sure we're using these words out loud, because we don't often, right? How often do I use the word browser unless I'm actually asking someone, what browser do you use? But if I say, how do you get to the internet? Most people would be able to answer that. But we need to use the word browser because there's going to be requirement, they're going to read directions on something, or someone's going to ask them and they won't know what a browser is. So we want to use, and by they, I mean we, all of us, we want to use that language. So North Star, taking the digital literacy assessment yourself, gives you a sense of kind of some of the vocabulary that you might not even know it was out there. And also, if you have some areas that maybe you could work on. Another tool that we've used is the Google Workspace Skill Checklist. And it really is just a giant checklist. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And we talk about Google a lot because Google is free. Certainly, if you have access to Microsoft Office resources, that's fantastic. We think that Google, the skills are transferable. So pretty much, it's not exactly the same, but it's pretty much the same. So if you learn to use Google Docs and to write your paper, you'll be able to do a Microsoft Office document pretty easily. But we should talk about the fact that they're a little different. So we concentrate on Google also because students can have access to it outside of your classroom. So maybe your organization has been able to pay to have the full Microsoft 365, but your students might not have it. And if they're using Google, they have more ability to go work on a friend's computer or go to the library, work on that computer, and their account stays with them. I know a lot of programs also invested in Chromebooks, which are Chromebooks are great because they really work. You come and you log in with your account, and then you're with all your stuff. And then when you log out again, that Chromebook is kind of empty and waiting for the next person. So Chromebooks can be very useful for programs. And Google is obviously a very big component of that. So this checklist, while it's Google centric, would be something you could either develop, or you could kind of see if there are places that you would do it differently if you're talking about Microsoft. Lindsay, were you saying that you teach Microsoft Office? So how do you assess people to determine, or yeah.
Yes,
do you-
I do a pre-assessment. I usually spend the first few days of like meeting them. Just they do a pre-assessment first. Just kind of like some basic computer skills, how to save things, emails, and one of them too.
Yeah.
Yeah, icons, like a whole range of things, like just identifying things like that.
And it's an assessment that they can do on their own, or they do it in front of you and you can kind of watch?
They do it on. At first, they do it on their own, so it's
Okay.
and then I says like as like they're going and like I can actually see where their
Yeah.
strengths are and things like that.
Struggle. Yes.
Yeah, but it's just like first day I get an idea of where each person is at, and I also like kind of make sure because they all come in with like varying levels of skill, like using computers. Like some people have never used a computer, and I make sure like they all like some of you might be great, some of you might not be, but make sure you like definitely support each other. Don't like put anyone down if they don't know where the power
Yes.
button is,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I do that as well.
And do you, when you have a big range, so you have someone who's really like, they're a computer programmer perhaps, and then you have someone else who's like, I've never even touched a mouse
Yeah.
before. Do you have them work together, or do you keep them kind of-
Absolutely. I will have them sit next to each other. I'll ask if they don't mind,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely do that. It helps
Yeah.
for sure. Mhm.
Yeah. So basically this checklist, the idea is you could do it for yourself, try it out. The idea is that you go through, you identify what you feel comfortable with, what's familiar, you've heard of it, you're familiar with it, but maybe you need a little work on it. And then you're like, what? I've never even heard of this thing. And if you go through the bottom, you'll see that there are several different tabs. So we have, this is working in Drive. We have Gmail, Hangouts, Meets, which probably has changed its name by now, I don't know, Docs, Sheets, Slides. Strangely, so this comes from Google. They used to have a certificate. They're still developing new certificates now. So this came from their certificate checklist, and they didn't have forms on there, which I thought was really funny, but they kind of felt like, I mean, I actually talked to them about it, and they've said that they felt that the same skills you needed elsewhere would kind of get you into forms. So I'm like, whatever, forms. But they are working on specific certificates now for different kinds of work, and that's why there's just not one giant certificate. But this is kind of helpful again and again, I recommend you doing it for yourself, because it will really kind of shine a light on the areas that you may not even have known there was something you could do. Like hyperlinks are sort of interesting to me, because some people, that's not even in people's, like, I didn't even know I could do that. Or I know we had a discussion internally where our financial office had to make a bunch of contracts that were identical except for the name, and they were doing it manually. And I was like, there's mail merge. I don't know how to do it, but I know it exists. And they didn't know it existed. So if you don't know it exists, you can't even Google it. I can Google it at least and find a how-to video very easily. So we want to broaden that. We want to, again, it's fine if you have a bunch of stuff in the familiar column, but you want to be moving out the new stuff out into familiar and then ultimately into comfortable. So this document you actually have access to, there's a link there, and I will send you a link to our folder in the next day or two, so you'll have it there too, but it is linked in our slides. So those are two assessments that I know of. Lindsay, it sounds like you made your own assessment. If you want to share that, or if you have some thoughts on assessment, I'd love you to share anything you want in the chat. Anybody else who has an assessment? This really is one of the trickiest parts with digital skills, because there really aren't amazing assessments out there. I mean, North Star is great. It's a little slow. So if I was 19, I might be annoyed by it. But if I'm limited English or a little, I don't know why I think older. I don't know why I think that. That's probably silly. But I didn't mind taking it, but so it was not a bad experience. But it's a very like click on the laptop, and you go and you click on the laptop. So it's very again, vocabulary heavy and the basics. But they have different modules, so you can actually get up. There's just general skills, and then you can go specifically into things like email, things like that. So when we talk about people, we want to assess where people are, what skills they have, what skills they want. We want to think about what they want to do. maybe they've told us that they need to write a letter to the teacher of their child, but email is the best way. Then let's work on email. I think our email lesson came from we used to write letters to the mayor, and when Bloomberg was mayor, he really liked email, so we emailed the letters instead of writing them as paper letters. So do definitely leave space or begin from actually where your students are and what they seem to want to learn. But if they don't want to learn something, we still want to get there. We just have to kind of come in from a different angle. Okay, objectives. So I don't know how many of you have to write lesson plans or think about your learning objectives. But when we think of objectives in this case, we want to think about what do we want the people to leave our class with? And that you often already have a very long list of objectives based on the fact that they're in your ESL class or in your math class or whatever class they're in. So now we want to look at those objectives and think about where technology could possibly come in, right? So if you're already doing something around writing, is that an opportunity for typing on a computer versus just handwriting? Or is that an opportunity for a text message being sent with WhatsApp? So I did include here this article, which does kind of a nice job of breaking down thinking about learning goals. But if you're already familiar with learning goals and objectives, you're there. Then the next section is strategies. So how do you get there, right? I want my student to be familiar with or able to use the present tense of the verb to be. How do I get there? Well, I use some worksheets. We have discussions in class. We work in pairs, right? So these are some of the routines I have, some of the strategies I have. How could technology help with that? So an example I have from me as working with teachers, if we were in person today, right? And I wanted you to work in a group and you were going to work in groups and I wanted to capture the information from your group, often that would be a chart paper, right? So in your group, you have your discussion and then you're going to write on a big piece of chart paper all your answers and we're going to put them up on the wall and everyone gets to see everybody's responses and it's wonderful. Except at the end of the class, I have all this paper. You are leaving the room and maybe you took a photograph because that's kind of the new way to do things, but you left the room and you don't have access to the stuff that you just created and you can't see each other's stuff. That really frustrated me because I hate having these big giant rolls of paper and I'm really bad at I have to go back and type all of that stuff up and send it out to people. That would take a long time. Maybe it never even really happened. That also seemed like a waste, right? It was sort of like this weird intermediary step. There has to be a way that whatever you develop in your groups could just be the thing that we share. So this is where Padlet comes in. I don't know if you've used Padlet, but Padlet basically represents the same concept of sort of chart paper on the wall, right? So one of the layouts in Padlet is columns. So each group could have a column and then they could type in their stuff and they're all on the same Padlet at the same time, but they can't mess with each other's stuff. So whatever I put up is there. What I can see what you put up, but I can't go and do anything to it. I can maybe comment on it, but I can't delete it or anything like that, which is the difference between using a Google Doc, right? Google Doc's another option. We could have had a Google Doc where you all have the same link, you all have edit capability, and you type in your stuff. But I could organize that in a table so you know that you're staying inside your particular column or row, but it's a little bit more messy because you really could type over each other's stuff. So I only do that sometimes. We're going to use that today, actually, but normally I would use a Padlet because it would give you the ability to type whatever you want, see each other's stuff in real time, come back to it afterwards, have access to it whenever you want to, add more later, right? What an amazing thing. And it actually makes it better than the chart paper did. So that's kind of how I tend to get to my use of technology. It was solving a problem for me. You saw earlier, we're going to see one again later on. So QR codes was another one where I often was doing workshops at conferences and I wanted to get my slides to you. So early days, that meant I would have photocopies of my slides, right? But you can see my slides have a lot of links in them. That's not so exciting to get as a piece of paper. So getting you access to my slides when I don't have your email address, I can't really, it's not easy for me to send it to you. The QR code allowed me to make a QR code for the link to the slides. I often had to teach people how to scan, and maybe early days you even had to download an app. But if you did that, then you actually had the slides. Now the question is, and I don't know how many of you today, what do you do with the slides? How many of you have saved them or put them into some place in your own Google Drive? Anyone done that right now? Right. So the idea would be that you could come back to these slides tomorrow, a year from now, because you put them into a folder in your Google Drive. Because you open them up, they're going to be in your shared with me section, but that section kind of keeps getting moved down, right? Because all the new stuff will come on top. So that's not a very organized place for you to come back and find something. So what I would often teach people is, okay, you have my slides now. How do you save them to your drive? And take time to do that, and take time to say, how do you get back to them? So we saw earlier with that list of the skills, right? So under Drive, a lot of that is about organizing your drive, which are skills that you would use in your computer in general. But I've seen a lot of people do a lot of things that are not very efficient around how do you find something you've already made. And that's a set of skills that will really help people's lives, I think, and help people feel more organized. And that's a big digital literacy skill, right? This idea of how do you organize information so that you can get back to it when you want it. Yeah, anyway, so that is one of the things I would think about for yourself a little bit too. How can technology solve a problem that you know you have? When we've been doing all this work remotely, I think people come up with some really great solutions to meeting your students via Zoom, perhaps, or some other online platform, and still being able to do some of the same work you used to do in person. So people have really come up with some very creative ways to deal with that. Okay. So when we're breaking up our routines, we can think a little bit in these categories of engaging and questioning. So routines around that. How do you do that? How do you engage students, and how do you elicit questions or answers from them? Building knowledge, process and practice, respond and create, reflect and assess. And we're going to go into those a little deeper in a moment. So after we've done all that, that's when we get to technology. And it's a bit of an iterative process, because I kind of think you kind of go round in circles. So you might even start off with, there was a program I worked with that wanted, they had listened to students, they had listened to teachers, and they decided that they wanted every student to leave the program with a Gmail account and to be able to access email on their phones. So those are kind of like the two parts of their goal. So we had to backward plan from there, right? So there are some students already doing that. And those students could go straight into just working on, not just, but working on the content that they would be sending to their teacher via their Gmail. But then there were going to be students who didn't even know how to add an app to their phone. And if they might not know their password to their Google store, their Apple store, they might not know where the app ended up, because on an Android, it doesn't always appear on, it doesn't have to be on the main screens. It can be kind of hidden. They might not remember how to log in, or after the first time. And then there's all the skills around email, like how do you attach a file? When do you reply all? When do you not reply all? When do you use BCC? Like there's a lot of things there. So they did a lot of work. So there was a lot of work where they created lab time where students could go extra help. They had some introductory pieces in class. They even had some one-on-one coaching if it was necessary. They worked with the teachers to develop lessons that would actually utilize the email addresses, mostly about returning emails, homework via email. And I think after a semester, they probably about 70% of their students had Gmail accounts. So at the end of a semester, you would look back and say, well, okay, did it turn out to be useful? Would we do it differently? So this is, again, going to be a process where you do it over and over again. But they did start off with that goal, having thought about their people first, and thinking of objectives and strategies in the sense that they were thinking about, this is a tool that gives you entree into so many different things. It's a professional tool. It gives you access to Google. So those are sort of the objectives, and then strategies of how you would actually use the email with them. What we're going to kind of now go deeply into is the Seattle Digital Equity Initiative Digital Skills Framework. So there are now probably as many frameworks as there are states around digital skills. We don't have a digital skills framework in New York State that's specific to us. But there's so many different frameworks out there, and it is a little bit of it's a personal feeling a little bit about which ones are the best or will be useful for you. You may have heard of ISTE. ISTE has been around for a long time and has a framework. For me, it's frustrating because the buckets are kind of like creator, and I'm like, creator, I want a list of stuff. So kind of what Seattle did basically was they looked at some of the more famous or more well thought out or longer existing frameworks, and they kind of combined them, and they've become the kind of go-to. So when I mentioned Draw earlier, there's a couple of other projects Lynx is doing. This is the framework that they're all using, which is why we're looking at it today. And it has 10 domains of tools. But it also breaks out specific skills that they think are needed by students, that are needed for employment, and they're very discrete skills. So I think it's a useful tool for that reason. So we're going to look at it. If you want to read their whole deep paper, you can go to the deep dive version, which will take you to their actual why, which frameworks they used and why they decided what they decided. But what are important for us today is the framework, which breaks out these 10 domains. And then there's a checklist, a bit like the Google one I just showed you, which you could use. We're going to use actually today in our next activity. And that's where we are. We're in our activity. So we actually have, originally we were going to be a lot more people. So we're not going to break out into breakout rooms. We can do this a little bit together. But what I am going to ask you to do is go to that document. So I'm going to put that link in the chat. Let me get that. All right, let me put that in the chat. And any questions, by the way, I'm really bad at using reading the chat while I'm talking. So if there are questions, feel free to unmute and ask. Nice. Wendy mentions she uses a needs analysis of students in the first week of class to see what they want to learn. That's fantastic. So that's something you created, Wendy? Or is that something that your whole program does?
Something that I created.
Fantastic. Well, if you feel like you want to share, you're welcome to do that. These resources are amazing. I mean, people are building them all over the place. Anyway, okay. So the link so North Star is not aligned with the Seattle framework in that it was created before. They were kind of created separately. The Seattle framework is the newest one. They're aware of each other, I will say that. But I don't think that North Star is going to change its layout to be more aligned with the Seattle framework. But a crosswalk would be interesting. So maybe we can work on that. I haven't actually looked to see how the breakdown would be, but I know that they exist in parallel. So good question though, Jamie. Okay, so the document that I gave you a link to is this document. And you can see we have these 10 different domains, they call them, right? So we have communications, creation, device ownership, gateway skills, which they consider essential, foundational skills, information skills, lifelong learning, mobile and online life, privacy and security, and workplace. Okay, so those are, when you get into them, some of them are overlapping. You could certainly do, what I've experienced when I've looked at these, sometimes there's activities I could do where, email is a good one. And I know I've already talked a lot about email today, but email definitely fits into several one of these. So if you decided to do email with your students, you'd be able to check off several of these all at the same time. So if we're looking at communication, right, they do a nice job of breaking these out into 8 different slightly more discrete skills. So we have communicate effectively, collaborate with technology, make voice and video calls, post on social media, use social media, set privacy settings, share information with others, and use messaging tools. And then they talk a little bit about what that would look like, right? So awareness and adaptation of communication strategies, which they're talking here about etiquette, right? And this is, with texting, it's such an interesting one to talk about. When do you include your lols and your emojis, and when do you not, right? So there's etiquette all over the place. Digital collaboration, which, again, I think some people do that more in their everyday life, but certainly in employment and in education, those are huge. Make internet-based voice and video calls. I have to say, most of us are now relatively expert with the pandemic. I'm sure we've worked on that. But I was working with a friend the other day who's an elderly woman who had to have a telehealth call, a video call. And to do that, she had to download an app on her phone, and then she had to find the app, and then she had to log into the portal, and then she had to know to come back tomorrow and answer the call when it came in. And there was a green microphone and a red phone. It was very, once you start looking at it from that perspective, there's a lot of places where you could be like, what do I do now? So it's really interesting when you think of actual use cases of these things. Social media is really interesting, and obviously lots of things going on right now with social media, but that's a great discussion to have. And students don't have to create social media accounts, but they should know how to, and they should maybe practice, like in a Padlet, you could have a fake Twitter feed or something like that. So you don't have to require everyone to get all these different accounts. I respect that that's another area. We talked about money. Let's talk about passwords, right? We don't really all want 50 more accounts with 20 more passwords. Even making a password, that's a great skill. So you see here that you have all of these. So what I would like you to do is, I'm going to actually, I won't assign. So my goal here was for you to come through and actually think a little bit about what they want you to do here is to rank the skill from 5, which is very important, to 1, which is not important. When you think of students, when you think of instructors, when you think of employers. Does anybody want to talk about their section or how they experienced this, if it was useful? I can see a lot of 5s, but then there are definitely some areas where maybe not as much. So anybody want to start us off with the section they worked on?
Sure. I have first section.
Beautiful.
So I was thinking, I kind of rated them all the same across the board, especially with communication. I feel like it's definitely like a two-way street. So if it's important for one person, it's really important for the other to know how to do it as well. So yeah, effective communication, I think is super important. Being able to use different technology, very important. You might disagree with some of these, I don't know, but making voice and video calls, I think it's important, but not as important. Like, I feel like the first two, like, you need to know. Social media also, I felt was a little less important. I rated the privacy settings a little higher though than actually using it, because I kind of still felt like, if you're using this social media, it means it's kind of important to know, how to do it, but like really important maybe to know like your privacy settings if you are using it.
And I have to say, even if you're not using social media, right, on your phone, like there's so many other places where privacy becomes, is something to, like cookies. Like, do people make conscious thoughts about whether they just accept the cookie settings or do they know they can? So yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Let's see. Sharing information with others, I think, is also pretty important, very important. And using messaging tools, I feel like I rated that one pretty high too, just so everyone knows how the different ways of being able to communicate with each other. I think is and knowing what what options they have, I think is all very important.
Fantastic. And and again, this can be very individual. I would agree with everything that you put there, Lindsay. I think, but again, you would do this with your specific students, and there might be a particular, someone came in and talked about social media, and now that's a really big issue. So that's a little bit what we reflect back. But I think today, for today's exercise, this is fantastic. So creation, I don't think I've looked at, but let's look at it maybe a little bit together, because I think, so again, as I mentioned, once you start to look at these, they do overlap, right? So communicating effectively from communication.
So creation, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to do creation?
For well, for me, I think I felt a little awkward because the only ones that I really looked into was as a teacher
Yes.
would be adapt and reuse the digital content that I have.
Yep. Yep.
And also designing. And I would probably, this cycle that's coming up, I really want my students to start designing very basic Google Slides.
Yes. Nice.
Because when we do our last day presentation, they always do the oral part, and I help them with slides in the background that kind of coincide with what they're saying. And they showed interest. They told me, how did you create that slide that worked really well? So I think that's one of the things that I will incorporate this coming cycle, because I know they're going to be excited. You know, something that they create, I want them to see it up on the board or on projector and know that they've created that. Because a lot of them, to be honest with you, I would say 80% of my students who I have right now, just writing an email, I went over the email writing with them, and that for them was really great. I mean, I would, like, for example, I would tell them, I'm going to send you an email. Look how I do my salutation. Look how I signed off. You know, hi, you know, good morning, everyone, or I hope everyone's doing well, or have a nice day. See you next week. And then I started seeing them mimicking the salutations.
I love it.
Say,
Yeah.
Hi, Miss B. I hope you're doing well. So I'm like, oh my God, they did exactly what I, you know, like, so they're doing that too. But I think, you know, when it comes to teachers and students, I would put it very important when it comes to the digital. I'm sorry, the digital the design part.
The design part. Absolutely. I think, and I love the way you kind of reflected back, right? Like you did this thing, and then you saw that they were interested, and that's a great way to start. You know, if I just come in and say, would you guys like to learn how to do slides? Whatever. But when you see slides that are fun, and you especially representing your own ideas, that's a fantastic way, I think, to introduce.
And I think also because the last, this cycle's presentation actually had to do with community and culture. So I was thinking about what should they talk about in terms of community. So they did a great job, and, you know, they were ready to, you know, like just read what they had. But then when I told them, I said, okay, as you speak, this is what I've created for you. Wow. And they looked at it and they said, that's what we're going to do. And I said, this is our presentation. So after that, they're curious to know, how did the words fly in? You know, how did it appear? How did it come? So they were really interested in that. So that really makes me excited, because I love designing the Google Slides.
Which is fantastic. That's fantastic. So I love that. And I agree, you know, I think for our classes in general, these things like writing basic code might not be something that you're going to get into as much. Understanding data is an interesting one, right? Because I think we can use that more. I've seen some really interesting, especially in math, slow reveal graphs, I think they're called, where you show a graph and then, but it's unlabeled, or it's labeled with very little, and people have to kind of, you know, think about what could it mean, and then so there's some interesting things we can do with data there. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, with the computational, I actually saw that something that might be very interesting when it comes to the writing portion of my class, because they do a lot of writing by pen, but I really would like them to do kind of like a Microsoft Documents, and it would be giving them the maximum word count, and they have to, you know, not go over that. So that's kind of a lot of editing, because they can write and they'll say, oh, I went over the maximum amount. How can I edit? How, you know, really thinking about how to make it work within the parameters that I give them. So that's something that I'm going to use with them. The other things, for example, the share information with others. No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the building a website or produce multimedia. I think that's more for employers. I think that would be very interesting for them, but not necessarily for my students.
All right. So it's interesting with building a multimedia stuff, because I think even a video could be considered that. And I am very interested in the use of video with students, but also thinking about them, like you're talking about your presentation at the end being slides with them talking, but that could be a video. So again, you know your students and you know where they want to go with that. But the fact that we have these phones in our pockets, it's sort of like built for making videos. And the building a website's an interesting one. So one of the resources we're going to talk about is something called Applied Digital Skills, which Google has developed, which is a set of lessons, like individual lessons on different tools that Google offers, but with these very applied uses. And one thing that we found is that, you know, a lot of students maybe have a business or have, I don't know, there's different reasons why they might want their own websites. And you as a teacher might want to consider making a website as your sort of back structure for your class where students can come back to get information. So again, it's not something that people are usually that comfortable with unless they've done it themselves. And that's the place I think for teachers to consider. But when we look at the resources, you'll see there are some lessons there that break out what it would be to develop like a Google site. So to consider that as a possibility. But I agree, to me, that would be definitely something I'd want to feel the students were interested in.
Right, exactly, right. I want to see where they are and how interested to go further than what I'm teaching them.
Yes, so fantastic. All right, device ownership. That was you, Ziki.
Yeah, somehow with the maintenance of the devices, it seems more important to me for employers just because they're in charge of so many devices.
Yeah.
And I don't know that our students really have a whole lot of issues with, you know, purchasing it or keeping it clean. I mean, they can do that, you know, well, those who can afford, obviously, the more expensive devices.
Right, and it could just be a discussion when you're talking about disposing or recycling, just so that they know where they can do that. And again, it's more like that could just be a Google search, right? That you practice Google searching, and one of the things they look up is how do you recycle your laptop?
Yeah, they can figure that out. The finding technical support I thought was just important all across the board. I mean, I'm skipping down to the fixing the technical problems. Because, we don't really have the expectation that our students are going to be able to do that. And it's kind of okay if they can't. But obviously instructors and employers have to know how to do that. That's my biggest problem is, you know, I'm so not savvy with computers that I have trouble troubleshooting just because I don't know where to troubleshoot. You know what I'm saying? With a word problem, it's not a problem. I'm going to figure out how to solve it. But with computers, it's like you know, and I do, taking advice from my old friend Lizzie, I do keep calm and keep clicking. You know what I mean? I do do that.
Oh, I like that.
Sometimes to no avail, and then I get frustrated because I'm not sure what to do. Yeah.
And another thing that I didn't put in the slides, but there's something called digital navigators, which is a new, again, kind of like with digital resilience. These are all these new terms that maybe are talking about something that's already existed. But digital navigators is sort of a movement of, maybe in your program you have case managers. A digital navigator would be kind of like a case manager who has a special depth of knowledge in maybe fixing technical problems, certainly helping students get their low cost broadband, things like that, because this is such an issue. I mean, who do we go to when we have a problem? And I do, so the only thing I'd say here is it is a skill set that we want students to think about for themselves, and that they are going to experience this in their lives. And do they have some resources? So do they know they could Google? Like, again, I tend to Google. I was talking to someone else, she just uses YouTube, right? She doesn't even Google, she goes to YouTube and types in her problem. Knowing, you know, identifying, like I have one friend who's super techie, I know I can call them when I have a problem. Or so it's worth having a conversation about, I think, because everyone does bump into this. And the key is, like you said, I love the keep calm and click. Is it keep calm and click on or something like that? What did you say, Ziki? I love it. Because that's it, right? There's a lot of fear about clicking, that like the whole thing is going to explode. And it's like, try it out. So there's a little joke in my family where my husband likes, when he's cooking, he's like, what would happen if I added apple? And I'm like, I don't like that when you're cooking, but in tech, I think that's great. What would happen if I clicked on this button? What would happen if these 3 dots? What would happen if I clicked on that? Let's try it. Like that experimental feeling to really try to bring that out in people. Because so with, I don't, again, if you're not familiar with Padlet, but Padlet really is very rich and you can put all kinds of content in your posts on there. And invariably in a group of 20 people, 2 people will add their own photo. But those are people who are happy to click around, where other people like, I did the thing. She just said, write my opinion. I wrote my opinion. I'm not doing anything more than that. So we want to really develop this sense of discovery of, breathe it out, do it, try it out. So I love the keep calm and click on. I'm going to say that to myself a lot. Okay, so fantastic. Thank you very much. How about gateway skills? Who did gateway skills?
I did gateway skills.
Fantastic. Do you want to share what your any thoughts you had, or any? I see you have a lot of 5s.
Yeah, I pretty much thought this whole section was very important for everyone.
Yeah.
Because
Gateway skills, right? They're the basics. Yes.
So everyone needs an email. They need to know their password, even though for them it's pretty much hard. But that's why I feel like it's very important to
Practice makes
emphasize
perfect. Right.
yeah. So I pretty much gave everything a 5, because I just feel like overall everything is, internet, computer. So that's why I gave everything a 5.
And again, we see some overlap, right? So they have protect my privacy on shared devices. And I was kind of connecting that back up here with the, I think the social media privacy. So, you could, if you were doing a scope and sequence, we could think about privacy, and then you could do it in sort of pieces along throughout the course. There might be a perfect time to talk about this kind of privacy or that kind of privacy. So your footprint online. I always think it's fun to Google yourself, right? And then really fun to Google image yourself, because who knows if there are images of you out there. So yeah, I think that, if you were going to concentrate, obviously these gateway skills are what they consider the basics. And we might not all feel comfortable. I mean, I'm still not very, very sure that my technique for passwords is very, very good. I have a friend who every year in January, that's what she changes the passwords on all of her accounts. I'm like, what? I don't even know. So that you might find in some of these areas that you yourself will feel a little vulnerable or less aware. And that's where we're going to get to next when we talk about some places you can get, both for you and for your students, the supports you need. Information skills. Who did that one?
I did, Arlette.
Fantastic. Arlette, do you want to share are there any that stood out to you? Or I see lots of 5s.
Yeah, because I teach writing and writing essays in particular, just for the students in particular to know how to access information.
Yes.
And to properly apply that information, right? Especially when we're dealing with arguments. They have to understand, yes, what they want to say, how to gather the information, right? Do their research, gather the information that they need in order to support their claim, but also to consider counter arguments. So it requires really for them to be able to access information and be able, even as they access, to be able to evaluate what they're seeing and be able to use it, in a very purposeful way. So I gave most of these fields a 5. Now understand search results, understand that search engines use algorithms to display results. I'm not really sure how important that would be for them.
Right.
So I didn't give it a really high, very high score, but but overall, information is very important for my students. Knowing how, knowing what information is relaying, what words mean, how to use words effectively, how to access information so that they can use that information to say exactly what they want to say and to say it very assertively. So yes, I gave most of these fields a 5.
Arlette, I love that you got this section, because I think it's so great that you're bringing in, what you're describing is good writing skills, right? But we're seeing here that we could incorporate that, or they fit very well with this piece of technology where, the information, if you're not using technology, might have been a book or research materials in a library or something like that. And now we're saying, well, how, our access to information just grew exponentially. And I think that's the definition of digital literacy skills, when we talk about information, that's the issue, right? We used to just be able to get I went to the library and I used the card catalog and I found 3 books from 1920 that had the information I needed. And now I have the whole internet. How do I decide if it's a good resource? How do I even do a bibliography with online resources? And I think, so you'll see it again, some of these things are long-term practice things, which I think those first few are. And then your point about the understanding search results, it's not that that's really a long-term or an iterative thing. That might just be one discussion. And it is kind of important for folks to understand why, if they looked up, I don't even know where there's DuckDuckGo versus Google and what happens when you Google something and how that, but again, it's a single discussion perhaps. It's not this long, full course practice that maybe using and applying information might be. So again, I think that these items vary a little bit in that kind of the depth or the length that we would be working on them. But fantastic. And I think some of these we could call media literacy, which is another phrase you'll sometimes see, which is very much about this, understanding how you are interacting with information online, being able to kind of understand resources and then determining, is this a good resource or not? That's a huge question. Okay, fantastic. Lifelong learning. Who had lifelong learning? Giselle? I see you unmuted. Well, we can't hear you. I don't know if it was Giselle. Let's see. Was it somebody else? Well, I'll go over.
I did the computer.
Oh, you did. Okay, thank you. I just thought you were unmuting. That's why I assumed it was you. Who did someone do lifelong learning, or maybe that? I know someone had to leave a little earlier. We'll come back. Maybe it was them. So we can look at lifelong learning. It's very short, probably high priority. Find learning resources, adapt to new technology, set goals, and reflect. Obviously, that fits into a lot of the instruction we might be doing anyway. So I think those are important skills and ones we're doing, whether we're using tech or not, and then you're doing it with tech. And when I think about this one, I feel like we could have talked about Google search somewhere else, but here maybe I would talk about using Libby, which is a tool where you can get library books, e-books from libraries for free on your devices. That's something you could continue to use and get whatever information you want. So there's ways to kind of push this out into new areas, perhaps. How about mobile? Who had mobile?
I had mobile.
Yeah.
As you can see, I had a hard time saying nothing was not highly important. I think a lot of our adult students come with mobile skills, but so many of these are life skills that I thought they were really important. And then also, if they're important to the student, then they're important to the teacher who could possibly be instructing a student on those.
That's beautiful, Jamie. And I think, again, this is a place where as a person in the world, whether you're a student or an instructor or an employer, right? How do you feel about your financial tools? Are you using them on your phone? Do you feel safe in how you're using them? This goes back to passwords. So you see that, again, another example of the kind of interlocking within the different sections. But I agree. I think, there are lots and lots of studies that are showing, and we know this from the pandemic, that for our students and even for many of us, our phones are our main way we interact with the internet and the world, and feeling very secure and able is really important. And so breaking out these particular skills, I think, is fantastic. So yes, I'd be doing all my 5s there too. And I agree, it tends not to be, this is more for life, right? Than it is necessarily for your jobs. For some work, it might be very important, but for most of us, this is how we get around in our own lives. So I like that division there. Okay, online life. Who had online life? I see a lot of 5s again. All 5s. Maybe this is the one I got. So we can see we have lots of 5s here. And again, I kind of like the mobile one. This feels very much like our lives. So finding a service, community resources, shopping online, copyright, which reminds me of, I think, Arlette's piece, for writing and things like that, you want to be able to make sure that you're using, and even back above that when Beatrice was talking about making slide presentations. I love to put images in my slide presentations. That'd be a great time to talk about copyright and Creative Commons maybe. Yeah, lots of things. Transportation tools, which app do you use how do you figure out how long it's going to take you to get from here to there? All right, privacy settings. Maybe no one had that. We didn't have any answers in these two. Privacy settings, does someone want to talk about? Again, highly important, but often places where we might feel uncomfortable as well. So this is sort of like health literacy. It reminds me of health literacy or financial literacy, where instructors can be just as much confused or worried as students. So these are definitely important areas, I think, for students and instructors, and they're more aimed at personal life, I think, than work life, perhaps. And then workplace, right? So there may be, again, for students, instructors, employers, I think these are skills that we all want, but specifically, they might be specific to different kinds of work. So we have understanding databases, for example, which might not be important to these 5 people, but could be very important to someone else. And then we see some of these creating slide presentations, which obviously could fall under some of the other sections we saw above, creating documents, creating spreadsheets, managing professional networks. So again, so you have a sense now of the 10 domains. We're going to go back to our slides. So now the question is finding tools. So you've got in there, maybe, I don't know if any of those really resonated with you or fit someplace where you're kind of like, ooh, that's kind of touching on something we're working on right now with my students, or that would fit really well with this project we're doing already. So the question is, how do you find the tools that you might use to help practice any of those skills or take those skills deeper? And some of them are very obvious, right? So we've talked about email a lot today. We know that Gmail exists. But with some of the other skills, it might be a little harder. And even just to come up with some creative ideas, this is a good resource to know about. So it's called the Digital Skills Library. It does use these 10 domains. I'm going to actually click out to it. So the way it works is you can, so they're still building it. I should say that first of all. So they're adding resources under each of these domains, and notice you can submit a resource. So they're actually looking for, this is crowdsourcing, and it's OERs, like they're really looking for responses from the field, and it's aimed at adult ed. So it's designed for us. And you can see it mentions the Seattle Digital Equity Initiative framework, which is what we've been looking at. So when we come down here, you could pick any of these domains. So let's try, what do we think? So let's do creation. So when you get to creation, so you can move between domains by clicking up here. You'll see all the domains are listed, so you don't have to keep going back. And then in here, you could search. There aren't, I will tell you right now, this is the one sort of weakness here is that they're still really building it. So there aren't always a lot of resources. But if you're looking for a specific element from the Seattle framework, which we can call SDEI just for short, you could type in a phrase here if you wanted to. You can look up by format. These are the kind of resource hubs that the stuff's coming from. And then actually they have it in different languages. So if you have students that speak other languages, sometimes when you're doing digital instruction, it's not a bad idea to allow for people to use their native language to understand the concept, so they can then use the tool to practice their English. So that's something to consider. YouTube videos obviously are available in many, many languages, and they've done a good job here of including other languages when they can. So we can see, as I mentioned earlier, the Google Applied Digital Skills. And I'll take you out to look at that specifically, but they've brought some of those in here as resources. So this one happens to be about analyzing data, beginning graphic design. So if we go, and you can see this is a project, this is a tutorial, this has got video in it, it's a lesson. You could take the lesson and then take parts of it back to your students, or it could be something that your students know about and they go look at it. what I will do is let's go out and look at, is there one that's really calling out to you guys? Let's see here. A lot of beginning graphic design ones. So these are all, let's look at one of these just to see it. So you can watch it right here within the resource, or you can go out to their website. So GCF is Goodwill, and Goodwill has done a lot of amazing tutorials around instructional technology, or just technology tools in general. So you can go there to see lots of different tutorials on Microsoft or on Google or whatever. So you can watch the video. There's a full course tutorial. You could watch it in YouTube. I'm not going to click on it further. But if you did that, then you could get the direct link and share that out to folks. See more if you do more. Oh, there are more. So there's quite a few in here. So Canva was something I was also thinking about earlier. I think it was Beatrice who mentioned being, creating. Canva is an amazing tool for making very professional looking graphics that then you can download and upload into your slides or wherever you want to put them, make little flyers or or documents for your students. So definitely worth checking out. So you can see lots of resources here. If we go back out, yeah, anyway, so lots and lots of resources based on these different domains. And not just tools. I think that's something that I think is a little interesting these days. So I'm not seeing huge catalogs of tools, and I don't think a huge catalog of tools is actually that helpful for us. I think we want to see the tool in an applied way, right? So it's not just that we're going to use Google Slides, period. We're going to use Google Slides to share information about our presentation topic, or we're going to use Google Slides to make an ebook about our favorite animal or something like that. So we have a project. It's not just using the tool just for its own sake, because that's not how we end up using those tools in real life, right? So in this particular resource, the tools are embedded in an actual lesson or an actual project. The next resource is actually by the same people, but it's done slightly differently, and it's actually nicer on your phone. I'm going to show it to you on the full screen, but if you wanted to scan that QR code, you'd get it on your phone, and it's actually designed. They're using something called Glide app, which actually you could create your own app very easily using an Excel spreadsheet and putting content in there, and it will actually pull it into an app that students could download. The benefit of an app is that it sits on your phone and it's very easy to get back to. When I'm going to go to it, it's a website, it's in a browser, it's fine, but you'll see there's some things that just don't work quite as well. Has been my experience. So I'm going to go to full screen. So part of what happens is, right, it's a little laid out a little weirdly. So these 3 lines, we talked earlier about like, what would happen if? So when you see 3 lines, it's usually a sign to me that I need to click on something because it's going to tell me more. So I think 3 lines is considered menu and 3 dots is considered more. So I'm going to click on the menu. Again, I can sign in, but I don't need to do that. So you'll see here that they've divided the resources by routine, which we talked about earlier, and those 6 categories of routines that I mentioned are used by them. There's a tool index, so they do just have a list of tools, skill index, quiz index, and then they've done some workshops around using this tool. So you have that option. If you get out of that menu at the bottom, you have these other ways of looking at the content. So integrations is where the routines are, EdTech tools are where the tools are, and the digital skills piece is there. So if we look at integrations, for example, I guess there are only 5. So these 5 categories of routines, right? This is the instructional routines section. So say, you in your class know that you want to bring more use of technology into your class, and respond and create seems like an area that might be interesting. So again, they don't have a lot, they're still building these, but they are seeing video meeting or a presentation. So let's look at the presentation one. So the presentation tool, they talk about the routines, right? Make a presentation to the class using a presentation application. Why? Because it's effective. You can do it in an effective way. Evidence-based strategies, how, so they have a little bit on how to do it. And then the digital skills specifically, explicitly laid out. And so I don't know that the routines are the easiest way to move through the site. The other way is EdTech tools. Again, they've broken them into kind of categories. So there's communicate, instruct, assess, manage, and create. So for each of those, there's a set of, I don't know what they call these, categories maybe. So say we were into assess and we wanted to do a quiz. So here are some tools you could use for quizzing, right? So that's kind of the idea that they have here. So it's a broad collection of them. So you have to kind of click on them to know why you'd want to use one over the other. I was just doing a little workshop yesterday on Edpuzzle, which it's a particularly interesting tool for embedding questions into videos. So the video stops, people have to respond to a question, which is very different than Kahoot, for example, which is a quiz game. And then obviously Google Forms. So you click on them and kind of learn more about them that way. And then if we look at digital skills, here are our 10 domains. So we may have decided that we really think that collaborating with technology is where we want to do more. So we click on this one, and here we get those resources that are very similar to what we saw because it's the same people. But maybe there's a few other ones, and they do mention some activities and strategies down here. So that's the EdTech Integration Strategy Toolkit, which again is still being developed. And the next few slides kind of take you through just what I was showing you. Then we talked about the Applied Digital Skills curriculum. So has anyone used this at all? You can unmute and say if you have or have heard of it. So again, without signing in, you can browse the lessons. This is obviously very Google centric. So when you're browsing your lessons, they have these collections that are usually related. There's some topics that they're interested in, and then maybe related to the season or whatever, or special days or special weeks. They'll have special collections here. So these are the Google certificates I mentioned earlier. So it looks like they maybe have released them. But then if we scroll down, we have all the lessons, and there are 209. So they've developed a lot of lessons. That's a little overwhelming. So what's helpful is to come over here to the filter area. And I don't find that the audience level really helps, because sometimes the lessons that are the most fun are actually for elementary kids, but you can do them as an adult and do it in an adult way, and it's just fine. So I tend not to use the audience filter. But say I'm like, we've decided we really want to do digital, we want to do Google Slides, right? So I'm interested in Google Slides. My students seem to be interested in Google Slides. What would be a lesson, or what would be an applied way to think about using them? So I'm going to scroll down and find slides. And I'm going to click on that, and it narrowed it down to 58. That's helpful. Okay, so now I want to also maybe do, let's see, topic. So my class happens to be on science. I have no idea if there are any. Okay, so now we're down to 10. That is definitely manageable. So we have create a presentation all about a topic. This is a 45-minute to 90-minute lesson. This is specifically on innovators. This is specifically on equal access to technology. There's a scavenger hunt through Italy, make your own space shuttle adventure, explore a topic, create an animation in Google Slides. That sounded like one that might really work for, I think it was Beatrice who mentioned, like having the things moving around. Present a project to a large group, discover AI in daily life, right? So now we can say, okay, you know what, create an animation might be the one I want to do. So I'm going to click on that. Again, without signing in, I could watch the video. So the way it works is it's usually a series of videos. when I see these little arrows, I know these are all little videos. So introduce, create animation, plan your animation, set the scene, make your images move, test and share your animation, create an animation in Google Slides, wrap up, quiz, extensions, right? So I could go ahead and here and watch each of these little videos. This tells me there's probably gonna be a little document, or in this case, students can submit their work. If I'm the teacher, I might want to look at the teaching materials. So I click on the teaching materials and I get the lesson plan. There's a sample rubric. I can even download the videos if I have internet somewhere, but not somewhere else. I can develop certificates for my students if I want to have them get certificates for this particular project. Or as a teacher, I might watch all of this and I might say, you know what, this is too much. My students can't handle, this would be way too crazy for them. But this one video might be useful. So after seeing them all, you decide that the video that might be really useful is make your images move. So there's a short little video. It's 2 minutes long, 2.5 minutes long. There's a transcript. So you could pre-teach language. You could change the speed of how fast the person is talking. Yeah, so some of these you'll see that they have Spanish, some don't. Most don't. There's a small amount that has Spanish, but they do that. So you could then play the video for students. You could give them a link to the video. If you sign in, and I recommend that you do go ahead and create an account on here. You want to make, when you first want to make your account, you want to sign in as a teacher. So it's going to ask you, are you a teacher or a student? As a teacher, you can actually see the student's view and then come back to being a teacher. If you sign up as a student, you don't get to see the teacher view. You only get to see the student view. Once you are signed in, and I should be able to sign in maybe. And it will require you have a Google account to sign in. So this is one of the few times when you do need to have a Gmail account to create your account on their platform. So you can get to create classes, right? So here I have classes, I have archive classes, I have my profile. And when I have a class, I can assign lessons to the class. So everybody in my class will know this is what they're required to do. If we look at this class, I can see that I have 20 students and I can see how they are doing within the activity. So a lot of people started this, not a lot of people went much further, right? So I could come back to them individually and be like, hey, you need to remember to go watch that other video. So if you really want to use this, you could do that. You could do the whole lesson here. You could move the lesson to Google Classroom if you prefer that. The way people join your class is through here. I'm not going to do more on here because this is its own whole session, but this is a really rich resource, and they do keep adding new lessons to it. So it's definitely worth playing around. Again, you get to browse the lessons just like we did when I wasn't logged in. This is me as a teacher, but if I go to my profile, I can change my view to student, and that way I get to see what the student actually sees, which is really a nice tool, because otherwise it's always different, right? Often the view that the student has is different. And then to come back as a teacher, I go back to profile and I switch back to teacher. And if you're interested in the Spanish, to find just the Spanish classes, I don't think they have it in any other language. You have to scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's this little thing down here that says English United States, and you click on that and you change that to Spanish. And now, oh, I guess it's not showing them to me now. Why is it doing that? Yeah, so they have 26 lessons that are in Spanish. So if Spanish is one that you want to use, you could do that. And then to get back to the English ones. Right. And so if you get to this crazy page, just remember you have these tabs across the top. All right, so that is Google Applied Digital Skills. There are a couple of other great resources. So best tools for teachers has a long list of tools and a little description about them. So one of the things that is tricky with technology is that there can be a tendency to feel like adding technology automatically makes things better, and that's not true, right? These are tools, and it's the content that is actually the important thing. So again, when we're considering bringing a tool in, we want to think about what it will do. Like, I was working on a lesson where students are doing some reading and then they're going to respond, they're going to reflect on that reading. Okay, do I want the reflection to be something they share with the whole group, or is it something that they only going to share with me? Because that changes what tool I would use, right? If it's something that the whole group's going to see, we could do a group WhatsApp. If it's a short reflection, we could do a Padlet, which everyone can see. But if it's just between me and the student, maybe that's an email, right? And not a Padlet. We don't have to use Padlets for everything. So that's kind of, the thinking you need to do. And then you'll get to know, I mean, there's new tools every day. Some of them are going to stick around. Some of them are going to disappear. You are going to have a personal response, or you're going to like this tool and not that tool. I have several colleagues who love Jamboard, for example, which is a whiteboard tool from Google. I don't get it. Like, I still haven't figured out how to use it for what I do. So I tend to use Padlet, or I tend to use Slides. I'm also not really good with Photoshop. And so I end up using things like Canva and Slides to make a lot of my graphics, where someone else might use Photoshop. So I know for myself, I should stretch myself and get myself to know Photoshop a little bit more, but I'm also able to kind of get what I need from my tools. But I do spend some time, even when I'm not aware of it, I'm spending some time deciding. Like, I have this issue of like, am I using a Word document or am I going to use a Google Doc? Why would I use one or the other, right? I use both frequently. Why am I using one or the other? So being aware of that thought process and making some decisions, because I'm pretty happy with my system, but if I had to try and explain it to somebody else, I realize, wow, yeah, I do have some rules that I didn't know I had, but maybe I need some more explicit rules, or maybe I need to shift everything over and I'm just been a little uncomfortable. I do still use my Yahoo email. I don't use Gmail because I actually don't like the Gmail the interface, but I have a Gmail account and I can do Gmail if I have to. So that would be kind of what we're looking for a little bit. And then the last resource here is the Common Sense. So Common Sense does a lot of reviews. They're a little bit K-12 oriented. So sometimes, they're very worried about safety and for kids, but they definitely have a great, like, it's helpful how they describe the different tools, and obviously they have them grouped here. So again, if you're looking for a tool, this is not a bad place to go. You can just Google also, right? And there are some other resources out there. What I would say, again, for me, something that I watch is, going back to that post method, is a little bit about the people, right? So is this a tool that my students are going to use in their real lives? Is this a tool that is free and mobile friendly? Is this a tool that, even if they're not going to use it in their regular lives, they're developing skills that are transferable and could be used in other places, and we would be explicit about that while we use the tools. So there are some tools, like there's something called Flip. Has anyone there used Flip? It used to be called Flipgrid. So Flip, I will take us out to look at Flip. Flip is a really interesting tool in that you, it's a Microsoft product, which is what's weird about it, but I think I can log in. We'll see. I saved my passwords. I'm really bad. Okay. So Flip basically is set up so that the person who creates a Flip, creates a question or a statement or something like that, and other people respond to it using video. So in this case, describe an experience from your early experiences using technology that you would do differently now or think about differently now. And I would share that link out to the people in my class, and they would come back and respond. And so you can see here, Johanny did a really nice response. I don't know that it's gonna. I won't play it because I didn't set up my sound to be good for you guys, but she played with the flip itself has this hilarious frame that she put on with all these microphones. So she's one of those people who's like, what would happen if? What's nice about, so again, as I was saying earlier with my thinking, right? Like, okay, so this would be a way for students to reflect and see each other's reflections, right? So this is definitely group reflection. This is not one-on-one. It allows them to try out video. They can do it on their phone and it just goes straight into the app. It's very easy for them to do. It's not public like YouTube or something else. And it's all organized and it sits here so they can come back and listen to each other. And they can play it over and over again, right? So there is something about video that is a little different than writing, but you could combine this with writing. They could do a video and then maybe they'd write more about it. So again, in real life, are they going to use Flip? Maybe not, but to be able to think about making a video of themselves that they're happy enough with to put up and share, that might be a good skill to have. You know, it's kind of the beginning of doing a presentation in class, hearing each other's, right? This could be a comprehension lesson that then students come back and listen to each, you know, at least 2 other people's responses and come back to class and respond to that. So and Flip is kind of fun, I have to say. When I've done it, it's kind of enjoyable in a way that like, oh, I have to write another paragraph. Take a break from writing the paragraph and get to do a video every now and then. It could be fun. So with Flip, it would be very specific. I'd want it to be something where I know we want group participation and everyone can see each other's responses. I want, we would be talking about making videos. People don't have to have their faces showing if they're nervous about having something on the internet with their face. They can have an image there instead and just have their voice over it. So it could be an audio response, but it is that rather than the written, which is an interesting take. So that's Flip. Again, it's free. All right. Any questions or comments so far? So what I have left is basically 2 lesson ideas that I'm going to ask you to give us some suggestions on how we would do it. So the first one is the idea of a cookbook. Does anybody do a cookbook with their students? I've done it. I used to do it when I was teaching ESL. I don't know if I would do it in AB class, but no one's done a cookbook. Okay. All right. So if we were doing a cookbook, that's the final product, right? That's the end of the lesson. What are some things, if we're going to go back to our post method, and here I'm using product instead of people, which is a little silly, but the idea here is that the ultimate end result is going to be a cookbook. What could some objectives be that would lead us to a cookbook? And the reason I want to do it this way is I want to point out that a cookbook, while you know, there's some obvious low-hanging fruit, like we're talking about vocabulary around food, we're talking about a certain kind of grammar. Is it possible that the objectives we could have math objectives within a cookbook?
I think, sorry. I did it a long time ago with another school, not this one, but they did a cookbook from like just a dish from their countries, originative of their countries. But the main focus was they were able to use words that told sequence, first, second, then after.
I love it.
So that was
Nice.
really, really good. You know, certain vocabulary such as pour, mix, blends, combine. So it was vocabulary plus sequence words. That was
Gotcha.
and we got to learn different dishes.
Right.
Not that
So
I
the
tried them,
culture.
but you know, like
Yes.
they did a good job.
Yes. So those are some of the basic ones I think we think of. In math, for example, I'm thinking about, you know, we're talking about measurements, especially folks come from different cultures. They maybe are more familiar with metric or whatever. So I think we could do some math in there if we wanted to, or how would you make the recipe for 5 times bigger? How does that work, right? There's even some science. I think we could even say some science in there. Let me move my picture out of the way. Any other ways you think a cookbook could represent I'm thinking even in the writing, right, Arlette, maybe your piece, where there's an introduction to the recipe and how, why it's important to you and memories of your childhood or something like that. So I think there could even be some writing in there.
Yes, absolutely.
I think
I
also
also-
pronunciation.
I love it. Okay. I'm also thinking design, like we talked earlier about like design or, finding the right images for it, or design could be part of that. Right. So there's a lot you could do there, depending. Now you could only just do vocabulary, it'd just be writing. There's no picture. So it doesn't have to be all of these, but these are a cookbook to me could fit into all of these, right? So again, the cookbook is the end result, some steps to get us there, right? So what are some things you can imagine doing as an introduction to this project? And so again, I'll share it with you in our folder, but I have a lesson plan from a woman who did this lesson. I'm probably not going to find it now. And her lesson plan is a little scattered, but she has a lot of resources at the end, and she kind of shows you what she did with the cookbook herself. And I think, there's a lot of building up to this, right? So maybe we have to introduce some vocabulary that could be several weeks in advance. We could even go on a field trip to the grocery store. We could Google online to find where are they having sales on certain kinds of food. We could talk about different cultures and, the national dish of whatever culture. What would be the American national dish would be an interesting conversation to have. There could be group work on pronunciation and the grammar that we're going to be using inside the cookbook, right? So there's a lot of activities that would lead us up to this. When I did the cookbook lesson, we did all of those things, and then we got to a place where literally this, we didn't have even a computer lab, so students were handwriting the recipes, and I photocopied them and gave them out. Now we're going to take it from the photocopied, handwritten version to something that incorporates more of the technology tools we've been talking about today. What can you imagine are some ways we could integrate technology into this?
I have an
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, Lindsay, go.
Maybe taking like a photo of the dish, like once it's complete, and like sending it and like adding it to your recipe.
I love it. So we could put photos from real life into like a Word document and have the recipe at the bottom, right? Absolutely. Any other thoughts about how we could integrate technology into this, or digital skills? Go, Lindsay. Do you have another one? Yeah.
I was thinking you could possibly make a video of you creating the whatever you're making, and then maybe make a hyperlink to it.
Which I think such a great, the how-to video is so interesting to me, because when I was in college, I was in Teachers College briefly, and one of the first classes we had to take was called Curriculum and Instruction, and we had to make a how-to video, and it was really serious. We had to go and like rent a giant video camera with a VHS tape in it and like set that up, and then like how, all I had was sort of Julia Child in my mind, and now my nieces who are like 6 and 9 make how-to videos on how to use. I mean, it's crazy to me how this has changed. So the how-to video, first of all, I love that idea, like the process piece of the grammar, but that's such a great resource, and then you can share it, and it can be something that all your students can see, but they can even share it back with their families in their home countries or other people that they know. And you'll be surprised how proud people are. You shouldn't be surprised, but people are very proud of that kind of work. So they really work hard on it, and then they share it with other people. So Lindsay, this is an interesting point. If we made a video, where would we put the video?
So I was thinking YouTube.
Yes. So you could definitely have a YouTube channel.
I was in your video. It was in your video.
I love it. So you could, so you could definitely have a playlist of all the videos, like a cooking channel, right, from your class, which is a really interesting idea. I was also thinking you could have a website, right? Or even and the website piece is interesting because in the early days, I thought a blog using blogging software, but now Weebly and Google Sites make it really easy to make a website. Or even embedding those into a Google Slides presentation, right? So you could make the whole cookbook in Google Slides. It's very easy for adding images, embedding a video, and I would maybe put in some hyperlinks, right, out to ingredients that maybe are unusual. Where can you buy them? How does it translate? Vocabulary that that's new for students. Pronunciation, right? You could actually have a hyperlink out to the student pronouncing words that maybe are unusual or difficult for us to know. So there are a lot of places where those take us much deeper and demonstrate learning in a way that's quite different than just the paper version. There was nothing wrong with the paper version, right? But these are all extensions to that, and they do bring in the digital literacy skills. So that's kind of one way to think a little bit about how do you already have a lesson, right? You already have way too much to teach. So adding more is difficult. So we want to find ways that we can bring the digital skills in, but that they kind of extend and deepen what you're already doing more than necessarily creating a whole new lesson. The second lesson I have, and if you have other thoughts, add them to the chat, or certainly feel free to unmute. The last one I was going to talk a little bit about was our email one. And the one about the email that's interesting to me is not just the act of emailing, but when do you email? When is it an email? When is it a text? When is it a letter? You know, we have this kind of joke at work where, like, when is it a meeting or when is it an email, right? Because we are confused by this. Different people are like, well, this is clearly an email that I can just send to you. This one will require us to meet and discuss. I like to text people. My husband likes to call people. Like, what? When is it? Why? That discussion is really important. And it's not that there's a right or wrong, but there's thought. You thought about why. I don't want to call because it's after 11, but I think it's okay to text because that won't wake them up. Or, oh no, that person I know, they have a alarm thing that goes off whenever they get a text, so I'm going to email them because that they don't have. So we have different reasons for doing this, but that is a huge discussion, or a long discussion and a long process of developing sort of thoughts about and then acting on those thoughts. So certainly making sure that students feel comfortable, and maybe that's done by having them practice sending their homework into instructor on an email. I already kind of broke out that lesson we did with the program I mentioned earlier, where we had to kind of go all the way back to how do you download an app. Passwords become part of this, right? Like, how do you create a good password? How do you remember the password? So there's a lot of different pieces that would come into that. But this then could become your routine, right? That the homework once a week, there's going to be homework that has to be sent in by the instructor. And I love it. I don't remember who said that they email their students. And that's also like checking your email, right? It's very easy not to check your email. So anyway, all right, we are at our time. I'm going to share with you. So there are some resources here for even more lesson ideas. We do have our evaluation, which I'm going to put in the chat. And I will also send you all an email with the link to our slides, the link to the folder with all the other things in it, and the evaluation form. But it's great if you fill out the evaluation form. We really want to get your feedback. That's important to us. Today was a lot of me talking, and I apologize for that, but I really enjoyed the responses that you had and the way that you looked at the 10 domains. And I'm always available. So you have my email address here. I'm always available if you have questions, or you're trying out something and you're not sure which tool to use, or you have some wonderful success and you want to tell me, like, oh my gosh, I worked on this 10 different ways and then finally this is the tool and it was perfect. We're always looking for those stories, because this is how we learn from one another. I don't get to work directly with students, so most of my examples come from working with teachers, which is sort of like students, but a little different. So it's really great to hear your comments and responses that way. So any questions? Like I said, it was a deep dive. So the idea now is that you have a framework to look for tools. You can think about which tools you really want to bring, or skills you really want to work on with your students. And then you can think about how to add tools to your lessons to get those skills give opportunities for practicing those skills. So thank you all so much. And
Thank you so much.
wishing you all very happy holidays. Today is a gray and rainy day, but so it goes, winter time. All right, well, take care, everybody. Like I said, you'll get an email from me in the next couple of, or probably later today or Monday. But anyway, wish you all very happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.